afternoon. Welcome to the SCORE webinar. I'm Michael Figura. I am Vice President of Operations at Open Applications Group. We are the owner and publisher of the OAGIS standard. If you're not familiar with it, it is the premier canonical standard for enterprise business processes, and it is the largest standard of its kind. And that's going to be part of the discussion topic today. It is so large, in fact, that some people find it intimidating. Some people find it frustrating. Some people find it overkill for their needs. And we're going to talk about a really amazing tool called SCORE that is going to help solve all of these opinions and frustrations. We've been working for over 3 years now with folks at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology up in Maryland, and they have been developing an open source tool previously known as SRT, Semantic Refinement Tool. It is now, that was the code name during development, and now it is real open source and available to the public on GitHub. And it is now, now that it's open source, we have branded it as SCORE. And we encourage everyone to check out the GitHub and Docker images. And if you would like to, you can become part of the development community for SCORE and start forking the branch and doing pull requests, etc. There's a full features list of requirements in there. And we love to see people get involved and start helping us further its progress. So we're going to talk today about a very typical business scenario. If you're working in order to cash, you'll be very familiar with this particular scenario. It's scenario 47 in our online documentation that ships with our product. And we're going to talk about this very first step in this business process, the process purchase order. Sometimes we call that the hello world of business processes. So before we dive into SCORE, we're going to take a quick look at how things are done without SCORE. That is to say, how things have been done historically over the years and up to today. So let's look at process purchase order using a tool called XML Spy, but you can use any XML viewer or editor to do this step. So let's open up. I'm going to go to, I've got 10.6 unzipped on my local drive here. And to show you the enormous nature of our schemas, I'm going to go to the standalone folder and the local folder and then BODs, and I'm going to hit P so that I can jump down into the nouns the BODs that start with P, and I'm going to scroll down to process purchase order. And there it is. So we're going to open this up. Now, I'm going to click on this first element node so that we jump down into the kind of the schema view. So as a developer, I'm going to implement our process purchase order. And now this step is generally done by either a developer or a business analyst, but at the very least, somebody with adequate domain knowledge about this business process. And I happen to have an example purchase order here. This would be what my organization uses, and this is the format and the fields required to implement a basic purchase order for our business. You can see there's only a small handful of fields here. We have less than 15 fields total. And so when we jump back here to XML Spy and look at our process purchase order and drill down into the data area and into the actual purchase order, you can see that we have a header and we have a purchase order line beneath that. And this schema is just massive. It's massive for a reason. It's because it's evolved over the last 25 plus years by hundreds of organizations becoming members and getting actively involved and expanding this schema with more and more nodes and fields to better suit their business needs. So this is an example of a gigantic schema that covers 90 to 95% of everything you can possibly imagine in a business scenario. Why not 100%? There's always an exception to the rule where somebody's doing something very, very unique or strange, and we can't cover every base, but we've covered just about every base. And I'm actually going to make this schema just a little bit more readable by clicking Configure View and turning annotations off. So I know that I have things like the purchase order ID, purchase order date, and then some address fields. So let's look at what those look like in here in XML Spy. We can come into the header and select ID, and normally this process is referred to as profiling. We know that we have a gigantic schema. We know we don't want all of these fields, so we come in here and we grab the fields that we do know we want, like ID, and we put together generally some sort of documentation called a developer mapping specification. That's usually done in something like Excel. But basically, we're taking all of these fields, saying copy XPath, and I'll just pull open Notepad, for instance, and paste these XPath expressions into Notepad as I continue to profile my schema. Now, if we go to text view and we just select XSD element and do a find, you can see that there are 2,228 XML elements in this schema. That's way more elements than anyone would ever need. And so the common consensus, what I've seen, and I've been working with OAGIS as a standard for over a decade now, I see people perform this profiling exercise, but I never see people take these gigantic schemas and make them physically smaller with the intention of making the developer more happy and the schema itself more manageable long term. Now, people have different reasons for doing things and not doing things, and those reasons tend to differ from person to person and organization to organization. But it's my understanding or belief that the number one reason people don't alter our schemas is out of fear. The schemas are just enormous, and it's extremely intimidating to come in here and say, you know what, I don't need all these types, I don't need all these elements, and I'll just manually remove them. There's no reason you couldn't manually remove them as long as your instance document, as long as the elements in your instance document occur in the proper sequence of order, then you haven't broken our standard. You can't add elements willy-nilly, but you can certainly remove them. Most of these elements, almost all the elements in our schemas, are optional and extremely flexible. So removing fields wouldn't harm a thing or break our standard. But again, going back to this attitude of, well, it's not broken, so don't fix it. The common opinion seems to be that the size and complexity of our schemas is simply a necessary evil. And if it's not broken, don't fix it. Our instance documents will be small and manageable, but the schemas, just leave them alone, and the instance documents will pass schema validation despite the size and complexity of the schema itself. So if we come back to the schema view, we continue profiling, and we already have an ID, and now we can come into here and say, well, we have a ship to party. So let's find that in the list. Here it is, ship to party. And we're going to make some use of some of the stuff under here, like location. So we know we're going to need name because we've got a vendor name. So I'll grab that XPath, jump back to Notepad, paste this in there. And we know we're going to need location because it contains our actual postal address. So let's jump into postal address. And we know we're going to need address lines 1 and 2. So we'll grab the address line, copy that XPath. And this process of profiling would occur just like this until we have all of these fields addressed in some location in our schema. All right. Now let's talk about a better way to do this. We're going to introduce now the product score. I mentioned a second ago, you could take our schemas and physically make them smaller, but that doesn't seem to be a popular trend in the industry. So let's look at SCORE and do this exact same profiling. So I've logged into SCORE. A quick note here, we have an online playground/sandbox here at oagiscore.net, and that's available to our members to get their feet wet, play with SCORE, create new profiled OAGIS BODs, which we call BIEs inside of SCORE. BIE stands for Business Information Entity. And then we also, for our professional and our enterprise members, offer SCORE as an instance on-premise installation. So you would have your own private instance of SCORE. The underlying database for this is MySQL. And for our members, we ship this version of SCORE with OAGIS 10.6. And so becoming a member gets you the real incentive to use SCORE and get involved in how it works, etc. So I'm going to create a BIE. Now BIEs can be OAGIS BODs, they can be OAGIS nouns, so the noun without the verb, and they can also be the underlying core components that make up our schemas. So you could, as an example, create an API using the address schema if you had some sort of web service or RESTful service that required the updating or inserting of addresses. So you're not limited to our BODs or our nouns. Anything that makes up an OAGIS schema can be profiled using this tool. So to create a BIE, and by the way, this is a first of a series of webinars we're doing on the SCORE technology. So I'm not going to cover all of the features of the SCORE tool, of the SCORE product in this particular first webinar. So I'm not going to go into code lists or context, but just know for the purpose of this session that a BIE or message schema must be associated with a business context. So I'm just going to click ABC, this little generic business context we have, and then I'm going to hit the next button down in the lower right. And now it's going to ask me what kind of BIE I'd like to profile. So I'm going to type process purchase order and hit search. And you got to be careful here on the definition. DEN, by the way, stands for dictionary entry name. So all of those various possibilities that I just discussed, BODs, nouns, core components, those are located in a dictionary table. And so we just searched for the dictionary entry name process purchase order. Now there are two instances here. The first is data area. If we were to profile this particular schema, we would be profiling the process purchase order located inside the data area, and we don't want that. We want the full BOD, which is process purchase order. And so I'm going to hit this checkbox and hit create. Now I happen to have this particular BOD already, so I'm just going to go to view edit, but normally when you hit the create button, you'll land on the page that I'm about to. So process purchase order exists. You can see it's owned by me, and it's in editing mode. And I'm going to do something kind of cool. I'm going to split my screen in half and put the Excel spreadsheet on the second half. And now I can profile really rapidly. You can see the entire, if it's grayed out, it means it's required. You don't have the ability to turn it off. But I'm going to really quickly profile an enormous BOD and make it much, much smaller. So we know we need a purchase order ID. We know we need a purchase order date, so I'll check the document date time. We have a vendor, so I'm going to add this into customer. So we have a customer party, and that vendor has a address, so we're going to check location, and then go into address. And we'll say we want the name, and we want the city, and we want the country code, and we want the, let's see, address line, and I think that'll do it. And then we're going to do the exact same thing with ship to party, because we have a ship to address here as well. So we'll check that. Let me shrink this first customer party. And we'll do the exact same thing here to the ship to party. We'll check location, we'll give it a name, and we'll say we want the address. And we want postal code, country code, city, and address line, which is, I think, a little higher. Oh, that's right in front of me, sorry. All right, now we've got that address profiled as well. And we can check tax because we know we have a tax line here, 13%. And then we can also, let's see. I think I'm done with the header. So now let's jump down into the line item. So we know we have an item, and that item has an ID. And I believe it has a description. Yep, there it is, description. And it has a unit price and a quantity. And we're done. So now that I'm done editing my document, I'm going to hit save or update. Now let's go back to the BIE list. And we can see process purchase order is owned by me, and it's still in editing mode. Now, it's pretty common that you're not working in a silo on it. You're part of a development team, and that team's going to have multiple members, and most of them are going to be interested in this particular BIE that we're profiling. And so we put in a handy feature in here called transfer ownership, and you can click this little multi-directional arrow and get a pop-up of all the users on your team. And you can come in and say, here, I'd like to transfer ownership to this particular person. And now they can start editing it, etc. But when you're all done and you think you're happy with the way your particular BIE looks, then you can publish it. You can change its status to a candidate, and now it's viewable by your entire team. Right now, while it's in editing mode, you can't. No one else can view it. It's grayed out for them. And we can come back into our BIE and continue to make edits here as needed. But finally, we're going to hit BIE Express. And it's going to give us a list of all of our BIEs that we have access to. And we want to publish this process purchase order BIE because it's now ready for use by the development team. And so we scroll down here to the bottom of the screen here, and you can see we have XML schema checked, and that's what I'm going to produce right now. But we also have JSON schema as an option, and we're also implementing Open API for those of you who are doing stuff like Swagger files, etc. So let's go ahead and leave XML Spy the default here, and we also have the option of doing multiple schemas in one go. And when you do that, you can say, well, put all the schemas in the exact same file, or put them all in an individual schema file, at which point you download a zip. So let's just leave it blank. Let's leave the defaults checked and hit generate. And now I'm going to go to the folder where it downloaded, and I'm going to open it up. And you can see it gives it a nice unique name, so you don't have any potential conflicts. And this particular GUID is coming from the database. So when you regenerate this, the GUID remains the same. It's the asset ID assigned to the actual physical BIE that you've created. So I'm going to say open with XML Spy again. But now you can see our schema is much, much smaller than that original beast of a definition that ships with our product. You can also come to the text mode here and see exactly how small your schema is. This is what developers want. This is much more maintainable, manageable, and it's not thousands and thousands of elements. So this again is just our first in a series of uh, webinars that we'll be doing for the SCORE utility. And in the future, we'll be talking about some more advanced concepts like business context. We'll be talking about how to create custom code lists, which are basically a limitation of enumerated values that you can place on a particular element to say this element, think of days of week, for instance, only has 7 potential values. We'll get all into those over the course of the next few months. But at this point, I think it's pretty obvious to all of you how awesome this tool is and how much of a game changer it is to the use of our OAGIS standard. I thank everyone for attending, and I'll make sure all of you have an invite to the next SCORE related webinar. Thanks so much. Have a good day.